Man, this fiddle leaf has seen better days, huh? Hello again, it's nice to see you back so soon. So today I want to talk about the Beatles release that's been somewhat overshadowed by their brand new final song, Now and Then. If you want to see me talk about that, I recently made a video on the song, but there's something that's just as exciting that got released 1 week after Now and Then. It is a drop of stunning new mixes of Beatles songs from throughout their career that I think is a very significant release. And I'm going to use this video to explain why, and then I'll share my thoughts on the new mixes. One thing I want to say up top is that in this video, I'll be previewing samples of the new remixes and then comparing them to older versions of the same song. So make sure you're wearing headphones so you can hear all those little sonic details. So after the Beatles publicly broke up in 1970 and worked towards their solo careers, Alan Klein, who was still managing Apple, came up with an idea of creating an official compilation album of the Beatles' music. It was the first compilation since the band split that saw a worldwide release. The plan was to create 2 double albums each of hit Beatles songs, the first covering 1962 to 66, which would be Red, and the other covering 1967 to 1970, which would be Blue. Alan Klein was dismissed from Apple shortly after this, so the Red and Blue albums were his final and perhaps most noteworthy inclusion in Beatle history, aside from partially being responsible for the band's demise. Compilations can often seem like a flagrant cash grab, but done right, they can act as a gateway into becoming a lifelong listener of an artist's music. This is what happened with me. I never owned the Red and Blue albums, they were from the generation before, but as a kid in the 90s, I listened to my dad's Past Masters and Anthology 1 albums, and then the first compilations I bought were the Beatles 1 album from 2000, and later the Love album, which were the catalyst of my diving into the Beatles discography and becoming a deep fan of their music. What I liked, especially about the Love album, was the updated sound, which packed a bigger punch as it had been remixed by George Martin and for the first time, his son Giles. Now, I've already been through the differences between remixing and remastering in my video on the special edition of Revolver from last year, but to sum it up briefly, remastering, which for the Beatles was last done in 2009 in mono and stereo, is essentially polishing the original songs to make them shine a little brighter and make subtle improvements to the quality, but leaving the build of the song intact. Remixing, on the other hand, is taking the song apart and reallocating the placement of the instruments and the vocals between the left and right channels, and also tweaking some parts to be louder or softer. It's a completely new mix, basically. Remixing hadn't been done all that much with Beatles music until the 1990s with the Yellow Submarine song track, and then Giles Martin entered the picture with the Love album in 2006, the One album from 2000 got a 2015 remix, and then for the past few years the anniversary and special editions of Sgt. Pepper, the White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be, and Revolver. They all received a brand new stereo remix, so many, including myself, were anticipating a Rubber Soul special edition this year, but instead, we got Red and Blue. I mean, it makes sense, as it would have been kind of strange to release the long-awaited final Beatles song and then randomly Rubber Soul along with it. Instead, Now and Then is now placed right at the end of the Blue album as a fitting send-off of the Beatles' body of work. And no, I don't really care that it makes the year's description inaccurate. It doesn't matter, come on. I'm glad that not only Now and Then, but several other Beatles songs have made the tracklist that weren't previously on older versions. I'm particularly chuffed that they added far more George Harrison songs, both early covers like Roll Over Beethoven, but also many of the great numbers written by George as well. This, along with other iconic Beatles tracks like This Boy, Tomorrow Never Knows, and Oh Darling, make these compilations the definitive best of the Beatles music, in my opinion. Now, before I go any further, I want to quickly take a moment to thank today's sponsor, NordVPN. Phishing, malware, malvertising, which is a term I recently learned where people get tricked by malware disguised as an ad. Bad guys are coming up with new ideas every day to steal your data, but NordVPN is here to the rescue. NordVPN uses its threat protection feature at all times to block malicious ads, especially when visiting unknown websites, and always keeps your system up to date. NordVPN also offers state-of-the-art encryption, making your life easier and so your personal information is secure. And if you want to save some cash, you can also change your virtual location so you can always get the best deal from an online retailer that have a habit of changing prices depending on what country you're in. And I'm pleased to tell you that you can sign up today and get 4 months extra on a 2-year plan by using my custom URL, nordvpn.com/Elliot Roberts. And it's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. I don't do a lot of ads, I just really stand by this product, so click the link in the description to start feeling safe and secure online. And now, let's get back to the video. Okay, so both the Red and Blue albums are excellent, but the one I'm most excited about is definitely the Red album. The reasons for this are twofold. Firstly, because on the Blue album, most of the song's mixes were taken from the previously released anniversary editions of these albums. The only new mixes are some of the Magical Mystery Tour tracks, plus 3 additional ones: Revolution, Hey Bulldog, and Old Brown Shoe. Secondly, with their later material, like on Abbey Road, the Beatles were recording in 8-track, which made remixing far simpler as there were more tracks recorded with different parts to rebuild the song. But things started getting tricky when it came to their older albums like Revolver, which was originally only recorded in 4-track. Thankfully, Peter Jackson's miraculous machine learning software enabled the separation of instruments that had previously been impossible. The real test was always going to be the Beatles' first 2 albums and early singles, which had only been recorded in 2-track, which meant that all vocals, 2 guitars, drums, bass, and anything else added in had to be placed on only 2 different tape recordings, negating any possibility of a decent remix. Until now. Peter Jackson has once again come to the rescue, and I am frankly amazed at the thunderous power that these early tracks now contain. They sound outstanding, but I just want to say one more thing before I get to my review of the remixes. For many older Beatle fans, these new mixes will simply be another addition to their collection, but for newer and younger fans especially, I believe these mixes will usher in a new appreciation of the Beatles' older music. We all know the kids love Here Comes the Sun, but how are they going to feel about a song like And I Love Her now that the production sounds just as modern and fresh as anything that was released this past year? Let's face it, most people under the age of 40 listen to music via streaming, and that's totally fine. It's the times we live in. But when you go on Spotify or Apple Music and try to listen to an album like Please Please Me or With the Beatles, you're met with incredible songs, yes, but songs that sound small and rather compressed compared to modern recordings. You'll also hear a jarring stereo mix which pans half the sounds into the far left channel and the other half into the far right, which makes for a very imbalanced and frustrating listen. These original stereo mixes on these early Beatles songs were never done with as much care as the mono versions, which the Beatles themselves oversaw. Stereo was a novelty in the 60s, and yet we don't have the mono versions as the default on streaming. Because mono is how the Beatles intended their songs to sound, that's how I listen to them, but it's a bloody nuisance trying to do even that. I need to go on a quick rant about this, so if you want to skip to the review, the timestamps are down the bottom. So I added the 2009 mono remasters onto my Apple Music library, but Apple does this super annoying thing whether you ask for it or not, where they match the song you add to a version that's already on the Apple Music library. So if I import my mono songs, they'll match them to the default stereo ones. The only way to make Apple Music not automatically match them was to get this, place 1 minute of silence before each track in Audacity, then manually opt for the track to start 1 minute in on Apple Music. And what's it all for? To listen to the Beatles' music in mono as they intended. But let's be real, no one wants to listen to mono in 2023. Mono hasn't been the recording standard for over 50 years, and while they do often sound better than the stereo versions because of the hard panning issue, the effect of it is that the music was emanating from this primitive centered block of sound which doesn't lend itself to an immersive listen at all. We've always desperately needed new stereo mixes so that younger people who are used to listening to songs with modern production can appreciate the magic of the Beatles without wondering if their headphones are broken. I think of these Red and Blue remixes as a litmus test for Beatles HQ to determine whether the public is okay with such modern mixes of those early recordings. I personally think they've nailed it and believe they should absolutely begin remixing every album prior to Revolver because the results are just superb. So now I'm going to go through my highlights of the 2 compilations with a heavier emphasis on the Red album because A, most remixes on the Blue album have already been out for years, and B, there are just far more differences from the original 60s versions in a Please Please Me remix as opposed to an Abbey Road remix. Something that pretty much applies to all the songs is that the hard left-right panning of particularly the earlier tunes has at last been fixed. If anything, it's like a stereo mix, but from a mono perspective, like the vocals are always in the middle of the mix, with the instruments forming around the centered vocals. Everything feels like it's opening out from the middle as opposed to clinging to the edges of the soundstage. These new mixes also pack one hell of a punch that the earlier tracks especially have never contained. Ringo's drumming is perhaps the MVP in terms of noticeable improvements. Those pounding drum beats have never thundered so powerfully the way they do here. Additionally, the separation between John and George's guitars is another feature that enjoys a newfound clarity. If you're into instrumental separation in general and like to hear all those different parts of a song, then you're in for a treat. I should also point out that I've been primarily listening to the Dolby Atmos mix on Apple Music with headphones that support the spatial audio feature. I really think the Dolby Atmos treatment helps to create an even more immersive listening experience. I just feel bad that Spotify users don't get to experience it. So, on to the review of the new mixes, and I just want to point out that I'm not reviewing the songs themselves. I'm not telling you how I feel about the lyrics or what I like about a chord progression. That's not what this video is about. Right now, I'm just letting you know my observations of these new mixes, that's it. So beginning with Love Me Do. I've heard people say Paul's vocals are mixed quite low in points and have this weird shakiness to them, but let's not forget that Paul McCartney himself was literally shaking from nerves when he recorded the song, but now it's just coming through a lot clearer. Whoa, love me do. Additionally, John's harmonica has an extra blistering resonance that I really appreciate. On the song Please Please Me, the difference from the old stereo to the new stereo was immediately noticeable. Last night I said these words to my girl. Last night I said these words to my girl. Instead of Ringo's drums weighing down my left ear and all three vocal harmonies clamoring for space in the right, I can now hear a balanced and more powerful mix of a killer pop song. Ringo's fucking drums, man. So at this point in 1962, Ringo thought there was a possibility that he was going to be replaced at George Martin's insistence, and so he's drumming like his life depends on it. And this new mix really brings out that fiery energy of his fills in the bridge especially. I noticed Paul McCartney's vibrato in the closing harmony rings out with more divine clarity. In terms of Paul's bass playing, you can always hear those melodic bass lines in Beatles songs. Paul's bass has always enjoyed a slightly louder, trebly quality than many other bands. But here, the bass is still noticeable, but more evenly balanced in the mix. It's bassier. One of my favorites of all the new mixes is the stunning work done on I Saw Her Standing There. 1, 2, 3, 4! The new mix shows how much this song really moves. Ringo's metronomic drumming is so full and punchy, and along with McCartney's energetic bass line, just propels this song forward. But what I love the most is the guitar interplay between John and George, which is just so much more pronounced now. The bridge 1 minute in really shows the distinct difference between their two guitar parts, which used to always sound like a compressed mush of electric guitar notes to me. And then George's solo sounds like it's been given this slight reverb that makes the notes ring out and adds a kind of mysterious power to I Saw Her Standing There. Yeah, I've just fallen back in love with a song that I've heard like a million times before. On Twist and Shout, the best thing I noticed is the centering of John's voice, allowing for his wild and raspy lead vocal to blast this song to the moon. Shake it up, baby, now. Shake it up, baby. Twist and shout. Then there are songs like From Me to You and I Wanna Hold Your Hand, where the thing I really notice is the clarity of the famous Lennon-McCartney harmonizing. If there's anything I can do, I wanna hold your hand. And in the case of You Really Got a Hold on Me, the Lennon-Harrison harmonizing. Don't wanna spend another day here. The harmony MVP has got to go to the heavenly This Boy. Now make sure you've got headphones on for this bit. I want you to listen to how this song has previously sounded in stereo. Took my love away. All three voices in the right channel, and in the left the bass and drums with the guitar floating somewhere around the middle. Now listen to the new mix. Took my love away. This is what I mean. People are going to hear these songs in completely new ways, and it's going to invite so many new fans in. It's very cool. Roll Over Beethoven in the old stereo sounds quite daft with the hand claps firmly planted in the right channel with not much else. Whereas now the hand claps are mixed in with the other instruments, and it just sounds much better. I don't have many issues with these new mixes, but I will say there's a fair amount of sibilance on Ringo's drums in Can't Buy Me Love. I'll get you anything, my friend, if it makes you feel alright. The original has a bit of this, but the hiss emanating from the new version was a bit bit distracting. I also hear a little bit of that on You've Got to Hide Your Love Away as well. The iconic opening chord of A Hard Day's Night now rings out with remarkable clarity that almost sounds like it was re-recorded for this new mix. Like with I Saw Her Standing There, this new version launches this song at full speed with all the energy of the movie of the same name.
It's been a hard day's night. I should be sleeping.
The clarity is so noticeable that the cowbell in the bridge ends up sounding hilariously boisterous. The songs I Feel Fine, Ticket to Ride, We Can Work It Out, and Day Tripper all got a Giles Martin Atmos remix in 2015 for the updated One album, but they've been mixed again for the 2023 Red album as well. The difference is that the 2015 versions felt like updated stereo mixes of the original tracks, but with a wider soundstage, whereas now Giles seems to have let go of any resemblance to the 60s stereo versions and has done them up completely new. The results are terrific, from the What Did I Say style drumming on I Feel Fine to the heavy stomp on Ticket to Ride. Ringo's drums are again a big highlight. Although I do slightly prefer the 2015 version of Day Tripper, I think the vocals are just handled a little bit better there, but it's not a big preference. In contrast, this 2023 version of Yesterday is the best this song has ever sounded. The different elements of the string quartet, the violin, the cello, they all take up different spaces in the mix.
Love was such an easy game to play.
Instead of all being placed together, separate from Paul's guitar and vocals, which also sound incredible. The clarity on Paul's acoustic guitar especially is just magnificent. Like, you can feel the exact amount of pressure his fingers are placing on the neck of the guitar with each pick of the string. The song Help is also a big improvement. That raw emotion in John's voice is more palpable than ever.
You know I need someone. Help!
Side note, how much more poignancy does the Every Now and Then line have in 2023?
But every now and then I feel so insecure.
I got shivers when I listened back to it for the first time. And now we are onto the Rubber Soul tracks, which I was very excited to hear. I love Rubber Soul. Beginning with Drive My Car, where the cowbell now sits at the back of the mix instead of incessantly to the right. The end harmony, the beep 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 beep, yeah.
Beep 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 beep, yeah.
They sound more delightful than ever. George's rudimentary but groundbreaking sitar work on Norwegian Wood is more pronounced, along with Paul's bass, which now warmly rumbles underneath the song.
She's shown me her room, isn't it?
Oh man, I was looking forward to this one. Nowhere Man, one of my favorite tracks off of Rubber Soul, is absolutely stellar.
He's a real nowhere man.
There was a big improvement to this track in the Yellow Submarine song track from 1999, but now it's been elevated even more. That three-part harmony has been given the space to breathe that this song has always demanded. The stunning playing from each Beatle is greatly amplified, from Paul's playful bass to the twin Fender Stratocaster guitar solo from John and George, to Ringo's sporadic drum rolls. The only song from the whole batch where I think they over-talked Ringo's drums is on Michelle.
My bell, these are words that go to,
which is otherwise excellent. In My Life just sounds like how it always should have sounded from the beginning. If I Needed Someone absolutely soars with this new mix. And on Girl, you can hear John's seductively sharp inhaling as if he's right in your ear. So that's the Red album. I didn't mention every song, but the ones I didn't is because they're just great remixes across the board and I had nothing else to add. And if you want to hear my Revolver highlights, once again, I made a video on that last year. Now for the Blue album, 1967 to 1970, and I'm going to start with Magical Mystery Tour. And one from Magical Mystery Tour that I think sounds great, but with an addendum, is I Am the Walrus.
I am he as you are, he as you are, me and...
It's given a more full and punchier mix, but the ending of the song is what's gagging most listeners. According to Giles Martin in Rolling Stone, quote, I Am the Walrus was so deliberately screwed up in its creation. The biggest issue is that the stereo in the second half is basically an artificial double-tracked mono, just a mono that goes through an ADT machine. So you're having to ADT a bunch of separate stuff and stick it all back together again. So basically what that means is that there was no true stereo mix of all those BBC radio voices in the song's closing minute. So Giles essentially had to piece them together manually in order to recreate that famous cacophony of sound. I mean, I think it's fine, but it's definitely different. It's also important to note that once the Beatles were up to Magical Mystery Tour, stereo mixing was less of a novelty and closer to becoming the norm, which is why the original stereo mix of these songs wasn't as jarringly bad as their early 60s tunes. And here, like on The Fool on the Hill, the new mix merely fixes a few issues from the old to make it a more robust tune. Same as on the title track, which packs such a bigger punch now. Plus, I can hear a guitar part from, I guess, George that I've previously never heard before in this song. Oh, and there's this incredibly immersive moment where the sound of the bus drives in from the left of the soundstage and then seems to actually like zoom around to the right. It's so cool. It almost makes me want to go and watch the film, but then cooler heads prevail. All You Need Is Love and Hello Goodbye are the versions from 2015's One remix, which means Giles thought that they didn't need to be updated like the songs from the Red album that were also on the same 2015 compilation. I'd imagine now with Peter Jackson's technology, Giles felt he could redo those earlier songs a bit better, but with these more modern ones, there's not much point. They already sound pretty excellent. As do all the Sgt. Pepper inclusions, plus Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane from their 2017 remixes. I could make a whole video about the 2017 Sgt. Pepper remix. When I first heard it a few years ago, I remember thinking I needed to like raise its placement in my Beatles album ranking, the one that I was just making in my head. I was just blown away by the dynamic range of these songs and how rocking they made the title track, how psychedelic they made Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and how cosmically immersive they made Within You Without You. Let's now talk about the singles that received a new mix, starting with Revolution. The powerful stomp of the song has been bolstered with a thudding bass drum plus John's blistering guitar and vocals. As far as Hey Bulldog, again, I was pretty happy with the remix it received for the Yellow Submarine song track in 1999, but this new version only amps it up further. It's louder with even more bite, just what you'd want from such a rocking track. You know, it's always bewildered me why the only 3 songs on the original Red and Blue albums by George Harrison were his 2 off Abbey Road, which of course, but then Old Brown Shoe, which is a fun, bluesy number and sounds great here, but there was just so many more to choose from, you know? Like for example, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which joins the compilation, as do plenty of other tracks from the White Album which received their remix versions in 2018. All of these are wonderful to my ears. While My Guitar Gently Weeps sounds like you're hearing it live. It's so good. Obla Di Obla Da becomes a total party, and Dear Prudence lifts you up to the high heavens. I technically did have my channel when the remix Let It Be tracks came out in 2021, but they were overshadowed by Get Back itself. But again, this album was only produced originally in stereo, and so only required a bit of tweaking to tamp down Phil Spector's overbearing production from the original, and the results are excellent. Same with Abbey Road, only produced in stereo by George Martin, and is probably the best sounding album in terms of production from the Beatles' time as a band. The 2019 remix honors the original by giving it a bigger soundstage, punchier drum and bass, and increased clarity on the guitars and vocals. So that's my full rundown of the new 2023 remixes of the Beatles Red and Blue albums. I've just been so excited about these. I've been telling my friends and family to go and give these a listen because even if you're only a casual fan of the Beatles, you will find plenty of new elements in these songs that you won't have heard before. That's my belief. So now I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of these new mixes? Do you agree with me or do you have some major issues with them? Let me know in the comments. Oh, and by the way, thank you all so much for helping me get to 100,000 subscribers. This has been something I've been working towards for a couple of years now, and I'm just so delighted to have reached this milestone, and I can't thank you enough. So thank you for subscribing. It means the world to me. As always, I have my Patreon page where I upload a bonus video every month. Most of the time they're Beatles related, but if you don't want to pay that much, there's a cheaper tier below it where you can access my exclusive Discord server. You get to see my YouTube videos earlier than everyone else, plus I share my notes and scripts on there as well. So if you feel like chucking in a few dollars to show your support, once again, the link is in the description. And thank you once again to NordVPN for sponsoring the video. Don't forget about that great deal, everyone, link in the description. And otherwise, I will see you all again soon. Bye.